Very good evening, all the august audience and the eminent speakers as well as moderators for the day. Today's initiative, which is taken by Microlabs Limited, we are glad to put up this initiative under the umbrella of Regain, which is a small program to help all the nephrologists to stay abreast with the latest updates in nephrology. We are all aware that COVID-19 being a pandemic and a global crisis, it was important for us to help every nephrologist to stay connected. So with the help of all the senior faculties of nephrology, so today's topic would be dwelt on strategies for management of healthcare establishments in COVID-19 era. So I'm sure today's program would help in the knowledge dissemination with the help of all the eminent faculties. So I request and welcome both the moderators for the day, Dr. Ravindra Prabhu as well as Dr. K. Sampath Kumar, and to take up this session and help us introduce the speakers and start the agenda. May I request Dr. Ravindra Prabhu to take over from here? Over to you, sir.
Good evening and welcome to this session. At the outset, I would like to thank the Regain team from Microlabs for giving this opportunity. And as we ease out of the lockdown phase of COVID-19, we need to really have the strategy of how to manage the healthcare establishment from the smallest level to the biggest hospitals. Of course, social distancing is the only key towards preventing the infection. But in the practical reality is that social distancing cannot be may not allow us to be near our patients. So we need a strategy wherein the patients come to us and both the doctor and the patient remain safe. So towards this end, we have three eminent speakers, and with me moderating will be Professor Sampath Kumar from the Madurai Medical Mission. I'll just give an introduction to the topic and by sharing my screen now, and then I'll introduce first two speakers. Just give me 1 second to share the screen. So the information that we have about this virus is that it is a member of the coronavirus, which has 7 viruses, 4 of which cause the common cold, and the rest 3 are the deadly SARS, MERS, and now what is called as the SARS-CoV-2. And this one causes the disease called as the COVID-19. This virus mainly transmits itself by large droplets. Which
so can you put it full screen, sir?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Yeah, this virus transmits itself by means of large droplets which settle down by gravity. And as per a study which came out as a letter to the editor in the New England Journal of Medicine in the mid-April, we know that the virus can persist on certain common surfaces, like on copper, it can be for about 4 hours, on cardboard for about a day, on stainless steel for 48 hours, and on plastic for 72 hours. To some extent, especially by aerosol generating procedures, it can also get transmitted through the air, but and it can remain in the air for about 3 hours. But in a clinical situation, this has not been well demonstrated. However, it has definitely been found on air vents and toilet seats and on the door handles. So we know that healthcare workers will be at some risk, especially if they are part of aerosol generating procedures. But the transmission is through the household contacts. Fortunately, no full-blown outbreaks have been demonstrated in healthcare personnel, even in situations where the protective equipment has not been used. So even though the healthcare personnel are at risk, there need not be a panic. Who transmits this illness? Mainly those who are incubating, those who have mild illnesses, of course, in the admitted patients, and those who shed this virus after recovery for a variable period of time. So to tell us about this situation, the first speaker will be Dr. Shashikiran Umakant, who is the professor and HOD of medicine at the Dr. T.M.A. Pai Hospital of the Udupi district in Karnataka. This hospital, Dr. T.M.A. Pai Hospital, has been handed over by the Manipal Academy of Higher Education to the Udupi district authorities as a COVID dedicated hospital, and Dr. Shashikiran is the nodal officer. So he has a plenty of experience. He's a very popular physician and a popular member of the Indian Medical Association whose opinion is sought in this issue. The second speaker, and Dr. Shashikiran will be speaking to us on how an individual doctor and should handle this situation and how he should educate his patients about this situation. The second speaker in this session will be Dr. Satish Balan, who is the chief nephrologist at the Kerala Institute of Medical Science in Thiruvananthapuram. He is a very erudite speaker and keeps himself up to date. And all the more, we have invited him because he comes from the state of Kerala, which has the enviable reputation of having not only contained the virus, flattened the curve, and also has a remarkable recovery rate. So we would definitely like to hear his guidance on this issue. To introduce the third speaker, Dr. Dilip Rangarajan, I will now request my co-moderator, Dr. Sampath Kumar, to come on and introduce and give his comments on this issue.
Yeah, yeah, it's a webinar with a difference, because we have always been hearing about the various medical aspects which are concerned with this virus. And now this is a welcome change from the drudgery of the variety of webinars, that we are talking about the real practical issues of how to manage our practice in inpatient as well as outpatient in these uncertain times. Now, to talk about the issues of hospital management, I could think of none other than Dr. Dilip Rangarajan, who is a very close friend of mine for more than 3 decades. And he leaves behind a great legacy of acute acumen, clinical acumen, and which is also interspaced with great skills in management. So he is the medical director of NU Hospital, NU Trust Hospital, Bangalore, which manages very popular chain of hospitals in Bangalore. And he'll be talking to us about how to go about managing this catastrophe in this best possible way. Thank you.
I will now request Dr. Shashikiran to go ahead with his talk on how to strategize for the individual doctor and the patient.
So please unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar and share whatever little I have learned in the last couple of months in handling the COVID-19 scenario in our district. And we did not have much cases in our district, but the experience has been quite a new one, nevertheless. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen right now and start the session. Just give me a minute for that. So the topic that I'll be talking about now is how should doctors protect themselves as well as their patients in the COVID-19 era. The COVID-19 era has already begun. We are already nearly 2 months into it, and this will probably go on for quite some time. And we don't know how long it will be on like this. General estimate is at least for the next 12 to 18 months, but it can be longer. As we have seen with H1N1, in spite of having a vaccine and a reasonably effective medicine, it is still troubling us for the last 10 years after the 2009 pandemic, which we were also affected with. So COVID-19 is going to be no different and probably worse. So it may be even longer. 12 to 18 is a very optimistic estimate in my opinion. So before I start, let's just quickly look at the doctor-patient relationship itself. We all know that it's a cornerstone of a good therapeutic relationship. We all enjoy the relationship and the rapport that we have with our patients. And we sort of get a deep sense of satisfaction, along with the patient also getting that satisfaction. This has been there for time immemorial. But in the recent past, it has been strained due to various incidents of violence, as well as some frivolous lawsuits. But then, what is going to happen now because of COVID is that it may become less satisfying. Now we are talking about physical distancing or social distancing. Now we are going to see a new era of physician distancing, where a doctor will not go very close to the patient to examine. And that rapport that we used to build with the patient in terms of holding their hands or consoling them by that way is going to be probably a thing of the past, at least for the time being. So I would think that we should, whatever we do now should not harm this even more. We should have a practical approach which will take care of the patient satisfaction as well as patient care. So I will first talk about patient safety. It is just not the same anymore as we have just spoken. And in the basic principle of infection control, before I go to patient safety, as a part of patient safety, we know that there is one basic philosophy and one basic technique, and we are all very clear about that. The basic philosophy is very simple. We should know what is sterile, what is disinfected, and what is clean. And we should know what is not sterile, not disinfected, not clean, and we should keep these two apart. That is a basic philosophy of infection control. And the basic technique is obviously hand washing. And there is no need to go further because we are all very familiar with this. But the third important thing that I would highlight here is that we should never hurry. Whatever we do, especially in this COVID era, whether we are dealing with a stable patient or an emergency surgery or even CPR for that matter, we should not hurry and put ourselves at risk also. So with that basic introduction to infection control, I'll move on to actual patient safety. Patient safety starts by giving certain specific instruction to patients in view of the modifications that we're going to make in terms of the COVID-19. Whenever a person wants to visit a clinic hospital, we have to tell them in some media, it may be social media or the mainstream media or even directly, come to a hospital only if necessary. And this is relevant for the immediate future. In the longer term, it may get relaxed as we learn more about this virus. And avoid frequent visits for general checkup and minor symptoms, because we see a lot of patients who come for general checkup as nephrologists and physicians. We see many people who come for routine follow-ups and even with minor symptoms. So I think that will formulate approximately 30% of our cases as a bird's eye view. So that can easily be reduced so that those patients, our high-risk patients, are not at risk of COVID-19. Whenever possible, we can even advise them and modify our way of functioning to ask them to come on appointments. In addition to that, we can request them to come only at the scheduled time, not very early, so that they wait longer and get exposed to other people in the waiting area. So appointments are something that we have to probably, if you're not already doing it, this is the time to consider introducing technology into our system and starting appointments. Teleconsults for follow-up is also an option. And we should also request the patients to visit the hospital either by themselves if they're fit and stable, or with just one relative or friend. And preferably that bystander should be between 18 to 55 years of age. That means neither very young nor old. And they should not have any premorbid conditions by themselves. So they must be fit patient bystanders who will come along with the patient. So another person is not getting exposed to the risk of hospital acquired COVID-19. And certainly no social visits to the hospital. We have seen many patients or groups of people coming to meet our patients in the wards. That is something that we have to put an end to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in our community for patient safety as well as community safety. Now, in addition to that, in the clinic and hospital, once the patient has come to the hospital, they have to be instructed, if they have fever and cough, to inform the receptionist immediately. They should not sit and wait for their turn, because I'm going to tell later that anyone who has influenza-like illness will have to be seen either on priority or in a separate location. We have to instruct them to wait for their turn patiently. Sometimes they may be impatient, but then by being impatient, we are not solving anything. It will only make matters worse, especially in this scenario, because we are probably going to take more time to see each patient. And it is for the safety of everyone involved. They should be seated as assigned and not touch anything unnecessarily. These are all probably the signboards and instructions that we can display even in the waiting area, as well as give a message when they take an appointment. they must perform hand hygiene before entering the doctor's chamber. And of course, even before leaving the hospital, they must perform hand hygiene once again, because that's the most common mode of transmission. They must wear a cloth face mask as recommended by the government right now. Even when they're inside the doctor's chamber, they must wear the cloth mask until the doctor, or unless the doctor requests them to remove the mask for some examination. So they must wear a mask even when they enter the clinic or even the doctor's chamber. Further, when they are waiting in the OPD area, ideally, from our point of view, we must ensure, as clinicians and doctors or owners of the hospital, we must ensure that there is good ventilation for patient safety, preferably no air conditioning. If it's an open space, probably it is even better. Shaded open area if possible. Seating arrangement should be with some distancing, which we all are seeing in multiple hospitals. And in those areas, it's preferable to have chairs or benches which don't have armrests, because when they are armrests, they're going to touch them and they can be fomites for further transmission of illness. Preferably, like I mentioned earlier, there must be a separate area for examining people with influenza-like illness to avoid prolonged exposure for other patients in the waiting area. Or if we do not have that facility in the clinic or in the doctor's office, they must refer, or we must refer the patient to the nearest clinic. So we must have an idea, information about that also. This is a typical appearance of a waiting area. We all are known to, or familiar to this type of waiting area. Some modifications, alternate chairs being blocked so that patients don't sit there. Some sign also there to tell that please don't use this chair. And our people are now very much used to this. Social distancing and physical distancing has been given so much of media attention, and there are so many memes on social media on this that people are aware, and I'm sure they will follow. We just have to make the facilities available to them, and generally we expect them to follow. Now, moving on from patient safety to healthcare worker safety, though the title was doctor safety, I have modified it for healthcare worker, which includes doctors, nurses, and all healthcare workers. Doctor safety in the OPD starts in the consultation room. Of course, we will not be frequently going to the waiting room unless we don't have a receptionist in the first place. But in the consultation room also, just in the waiting area, we must have good ventilation, preferably without air conditioning. Now, this air conditioning issue is a little complicated. There are various views on this. It may be in summer, it may be very difficult to sit in a consultation room without the air conditioning. So if it's a single piece air conditioning, either a split AC or a window AC, if the temperature can be maintained between 24 and 30 degrees Celsius, it is still okay. But if you are going to expect patients to have aerosol generating sneezing, coughing without mask, then it may be risky. So we have to make a decision of what type of patients we are going to see and then make a decision based on that. However, central air conditioning is certainly not advisable. Split AC, window AC, single unit AC are okay if the temperature can be kept between 24 and 30 degrees Celsius. Usually 24 to 26 is considered quite comfortable also. The distance between the doctor and the patient during the time of examination in the consultation chamber should be at least 4 feet. 4 to 6 feet would be even better. And even here inside that consultation room, an armless chair or an armless stool is preferable to one with an arm, again, to prevent it from acting as a fomite. Patient continues to wear a mask. That should be advised as told in the waiting room description. They must have the mask even when they enter the doctor's chamber, and remove it only if specifically instructed by the doctor for examination of the face or the mouth. And this examination of mouth or throat should be avoided as much as possible and must be done only when it's absolutely necessary, because even talking or even simple exhalation can also spread droplets in a very small but way. But then since multiple people will be entering and it's a closed area of doctor's chamber, the exposure could be quite heavy. So it is better to avoid throat examination unless it is mandatory. Even better if you can have a separate room for just throat examination where the patient goes in, removes a mask, you go in with an N95 mask, examine the patient, and then come out, and the patient comes out wearing a mask again would be probably better, and hand hygiene frequently during that process. But then it depends on how our setup is, and this is an ideal time, ideal opportunity for single doctor clinics as well as other clinics to also modify the way we work, which will be quite useful in the many months to come. And in addition to that, another tip is when we are examining cardiovascular system or even respiratory system, we are used to bending in front of the patient, especially when you want to auscultate the anterior areas or the axillary area, lower axillary area. We usually bend in front of the patient's face and examine. I have done that. I have seen many of my physician colleagues do that. That probably should be totally avoided from now on, in spite of the patient wearing a mask, because we will be in the direct line of the patient's breathing. So it is better that we examine even the anterior areas from behind. So we should ideally stand behind the patient and use a stethoscope to auscultate the anterior areas. That is the only way to go about in the near future, unless this COVID-19 becomes history, which is not going to be very soon, as we have repeatedly been discussing. In the OPD, there are various recommendations for PPE. There are various guidelines also. Ministry of Health and Family Welfare of the Government of India is issuing guidelines from time to time. They have already issued a revision just a few days ago. But what goes without saying is, at all times when we are inside a hospital, we must wear at least a triple layer mask. Either a hospital, clinic, or even a chamber, we must wear at least a triple layer mask. If you are expecting an aerosol generating procedure, where a patient may cough or sneeze without a mask, or if you're going to perform intubation, which will be dealt with in a subsequent session after mine, or any other procedure that will generate aerosol, we must use N95. Otherwise, a triple layer mask is said to be quite useful, quite effective. Non-sterile examination gloves are adequate. We don't need to use sterile gloves for this. Non-sterile gloves. Now, how frequently do we change these non-sterile gloves? It is important to remember that these non-sterile gloves also can be sterilized using hand rub. Though it is not ideal, we can consider doing that, unless we have the resources adequate to change a non-sterile glove set for every patient. If you're going to see only 10 to 12 patients in a day, we can certainly do that. But then eventually, since the cost is also going to be transferred to the patient eventually, so we have to take a practical view here. So if you think it is difficult to change a non-sterile examination glove per patient, we can consider as a second option using the hand sanitizer on the gloved hand. Ideally, it would be better to change the examination glove after every patient, especially if you have touched the patient. If you have not touched the patient, then of course we can move on with little of sanitization. Then further guidelines regarding other healthcare workers also, we have to look at nurses, our receptionists, our billing staff, our cleaning staff, pharmacists and technicians will be dealt with by the subsequent speakers. So I will not go in detail into this. But importantly, the principle is to minimize their exposure. Whether it is our physician colleagues or other doctor colleagues, only those who are responsible for managing a patient actively should go near the patient. Going near the patient just to see how they are, just to ask something, or out of curiosity, again, should be something that we will be avoiding in the near future. So only if it is absolutely necessary and essential, we must go near the patient. So going 6 feet near the patient should be only on the basis of necessity. And the level of protection that we advise should be based on the level of exposure that we are going to have with the patient. Assuming that every patient is COVID positive until otherwise proven, whenever we are going towards a patient, and based on the procedures that we are going to perform and the scenario, with practice and with experience, we are going to learn more and more. But currently, there are certain guidelines given. Before going to those guidelines, I will also mention here that the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare as well as ICMR have also recommended HCQS prophylaxis for all healthcare workers who are treating possibly COVID suspect or positive patients. We all know the dosage and duration, so I will not go into that, but it is preferable to take it as per the guidelines. Some of our colleagues, either doctors or other healthcare workers, may require psychosocial counseling also if the number of COVID cases increase in our particular facility. Because the way we manage them, especially if the mortality rate is high, or especially if there are more number of them requiring ICU care, the experience in other countries has been that many of the healthcare workers have required some form of counseling because it's very stressful to go through that. We are lucky in our area at least not to have gone into that stage yet, but we don't know whether or when it will happen. We have to wait and see. But at least a facility for that should be earmarked and kept online so that it can be utilized whenever necessary. This is a guideline issued by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. These are again changed time to time. I have highlighted, I will talk about only 2 and 3 here primarily. In the doctor's chamber, the risk level is, considered as mild or low. And they have recommended only a triple layer mask with latex gloves. Latex is again non-sterile, like I mentioned earlier, examination gloves. But then, depending on the availability of resources and our level of anxiety or concern, we can potentially use even a N95 mask. We should remember that N95 mask can also be reused. There is a limited reuse facility for N95. There are guidelines, there are even CDC guidelines available online, how to reuse or perform extended use of N95. Please go through the CDC website if you have not already seen that. There are specific ways of how to store an N95 after using it for certain hours and use it after about 72 hours. Again, the same N95 kept properly labeled with time and date can be reused after about 3 days. There are guidelines, please go through that. I will not go into details of that. But in certain clinical scenarios like dental examination or dental clinics, ENT clinics and ophthalmology clinics, it is mentioned that the risk is moderate, higher than what we have seen there. So N95 mask, goggles and latex gloves face shield is recommended. For help desk, pharmacy counter and other cleaning staff, a triple layer mask with latex gloves is recommended. Now, going to the end of the talk, I'll talk a little about family safety. We have spoken about patient safety and healthcare worker safety, but all of us healthcare workers have a family also. Now, when we go back home, we are going to put our family also at some amount of risk, whether it's low or moderate is depending on the situation. Especially if you have vulnerable people in our hospital or in our home, we have to be extra careful. So here, what is important to remember is, it's not about family here, but it's about our personal safety. If we have a beard, it is something that we have to consider removing, because especially a large beard will interfere with the seal of the mask, especially of the N95 mask. So my type is okay, probably a French beard where the mask will completely cover and touch only the skin, which is acceptable. But when it comes to people who have a large beard or a long beard, it is something that they have to consider. They have to consider based on their personal choices. But this is a point that I really want to make very strongly. As a physician, as a clinician, we need to carry minimal essentials to the hospital. I carry only 3 things to the hospital when I go, apart from my clothes. That is a phone, my car key, and my spectacles. Nothing else. I don't wear a watch. I don't carry my wallet. Wallet is in the car to use if necessary. We rarely use the wallet in the hospital anyway. I have stopped wearing belt. So it's just anything that can be washed, and these 3 things is what I take. So each of us have to make a decision on what we want to carry, what is essential for us. So again, after that would be, when you enter the hospital, it is better for us to change our street or home clothes to a hospital scrubs. That's what we follow. When we enter the hospital for clinical care, we directly go to a room that is assigned to us. We change our dress to a surgical scrub and then hang our clothes there and then go to the ward and do whatever is necessary. And when we finish our duty, before leaving the hospital, we remove the scrub, take a full head bath in the hospital, preferably a hot bath, including washing the head with shampoo or soap, and then we wear our street clothes and go back home. That is what we're actually doing. So these facilities also hospitals and clinics will need to consider for all healthcare workers. After reaching home or even before reaching home, ideally, this is well known, many people are sharing their experiences. We must call home rather than going and pressing the bell, calling bell, because we don't want to touch the bell also because it could be a fomite. So call home using your phone, ask them to open the door. Before entering the home, before entering your home, please wash hands, preferably outside if you have the facility available with soap. After that, disinfect all the items that you have taken. A phone can be washed or cleaned using a disinfectant. Hand sanitizer is good enough. Without, if you use too much, it may get into the holes, but little quantity that is just enough to sanitize would be adequate. Spectacles can be washed with soap water. Keys can be sanitized with the hand sanitizer. And anything else you can decide on case-to-case basis. After that, we must take bath again. This is not my usual hairstyle. I usually have a normal hairstyle, but because of the requirement of 2 to 3 baths per day, while we were taking active care of patients when we had patients, I had to do this because anyway barber shops are also closed. So this is self, do it yourself, where I did it closed, and it's really very convenient and comfortable appearance, whatever it is, right? And after taking bath, we must wash all the clothes that we have worn in the hospital, preferably in hot water with soap, and that usually takes care of reducing the transmission or even preventing transmission to our family members. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Shashikiran, for that comprehensive talk on how a doctor and about the patient safety. I must mention here that there will definitely be some overlaps in the talks, and this is only to reinforce the facts of safety, which are very important. I will now request Dr. Satish Balan to come on and give his talk on the clinics, how they should manage that.
Yeah, good evening to everyone. And thank you, Ravindra, and thank you for Sampath and the organizers for giving me this option. So let me just start my slides. So I thank Dr. Shashikiran also for making my job a little bit easier, because he has really emphasized all the important things that you should do when you are running the clinic during the COVID era. But I will just summarize what he has said and emphasize certain things which are important. One is that private practice is dangerous in this era. So if you can avoid practice, that will be the best option. But then not everybody can do that. And you will also not only need to avoid have to a source of income during this time. So it is important for many of you to continue the practice, me included. The first thing is that if you are running a private clinic of your own, you should have adequately trained staff. You should also conduct mock drills prior to restarting your practice. Tell them what all you should do and what all should be done. What all should do, which will just summarize what you do now. So the best time for this will be the best time is to introduce telehealth at this time, because telehealth will be difficult to introduce at other times. Patients will not be willing to pay for telehealth. It's a very big problem now, because you may have telehealth, but patients are not willing to pay. They think that not coming to the doctor, they don't have to pay. But it is different thing. This time it is possible to convince them that in order to do telehealth and make them pay for it, and that can be utilized later on also when you have the option. So first thing is that, like Dr. Shashikiran said, that you should see patients only after appointment. So patients should be given appointment previous day. Nobody who's walking in should be allowed to come and see you, whatever be the reason. And before that, before the patient comes, they should be asked about fever, they should be about travel history, exposure to COVID, and only then the appointment should be given. And you should not be seeing fever patients. Probably you should refer them to a designated center before they can come and see you. So before the consultation itself, the patient should be counseled about what should be done. That what you should counsel them, that when they come, they will have to wear the mask and they will have their temperature taken. So at the outset itself, the person standing outside the clinic should take the temperature using a non-touch device that we all have, that is available in most centers, available. You can buy it for the clinic purpose also. They should come at the time of appointment. They should not come before or after or things. So if it's an appointment 10 o'clock, maybe about 10 minutes leeway you can give either side, but not more than that. And if they are going to delay or something, they should call up and tell us so that we can make proper arrangements. Again, social distancing should be done. Patients and bystanders should avoid communication or handshaking with others, patients, or with staff. So it's common practice for patients to sit down and chat with each other. So this can be effectively prevented by a proper arranging or seating itself. And importantly, all patients and the bystanders should wash hands or use sanitizer at the time of entry and at the time of consultation. So at the time they come into the clinic, they should wear. At the time they enter the doctor's chamber, again, they should be able to wash their hands. At least 2 times they should be able to wash their hands. There are the reception areas, of course, like he said, you should have a proper, by at least 1 meter distance. So if you have a counter between the reception staff and the patient, you should put another barrier just beyond that, so that you need at least a 1 meter distance. You should stand away, and importantly, money transfer. So should be preferably electronic. So you can use apps, you can use PhonePe or Paytm or something like that. You can use that, what do you call that, logo on the table so that they can do the transfer electronically. So if you're collecting cash, you should collect in plastic containers and keep it away, and probably should wash hands before and after collecting the cash. The reception staff should be trained in that. Remember that all fever is COVID, unless you have obvious signs of infection. The only thing which you will obviously have is urinary tract symptoms or cellulitis. So these are 2 things which you can diagnose clinically. But again, should mention that just presence of pyuria does not mean urinary tract infection unless you have symptoms of UTI. Do not assume that patient with fever and a report previously has submitted saying that you've got 20 to 30 pustules on urine. No, that does not mean that he has got UTI. He may be having COVID with some pustules in the urine. So also atypical presences of COVID such as diarrhea should be considered. So every patient who is having symptoms should be considered as COVID. Every patient who is asymptomatic also you should think that they should have COVID and behave accordingly. And patients should also be instructed to do that. Assume the doctor is having COVID and treat accordingly. Only then the patient will be able to follow social distancing. An important thing about masks is that you should use the mask to be done properly. So you can see this 3 masks which are using one. This one is not covering the nose. Just set the proper pointer. Yeah. So this is not covering the nose. This is not covering the chin. The third mask here is done below the chin and is not covering the face at all. That is not acceptable. And now you can see this type of mask that contains a filter in the mask that should not be used because this filter is a one-way filter. It allows clean air to go in and allows the entire whatever is coming out to be coming out. So you should not allow this type of mask, and patients with this type of mask should be asked to wear another mask over it if they are coming with this type of mask. So this is the proper mask to be worn and that should be followed. So you should train the person outside the OP to ensure that these masks are worn, and the person who's coming in, if you have a nurse or somebody who's there in your clinic, they should also tell the patient to wear them. Many of the time when they come into the clinic, they'll start removing the mask and behave like this. So that also should not be allowed. The person who is in the clinic should be able to tell them to wear mask properly. Then avoid examination unless unnecessary. So no need of examination. Many of the patients you can see without exam, by talking to them, getting a proper history, you can get a diagnosis. So examinations only if necessary. You can see things like edema and JVP without really going close to the patient. So really you need not do it, and crepitations can be assumed the patient is having dyspnea with a raised JVP. So you need not even examine the chest for that. And again, procedures, of course, I'm not going into further detail. Dr. Shashi has dealt with it beautifully. So we are not going to that. So basically, once you have assumed that once you have done a proper examination and you have seen the patient in the clinic, that's a good way of doing things. But the best way of doing things is to avoid seeing the patient altogether. And therefore, transition to telehealth is the key to prevent infection. So previously, we used to say that no treatment without examination. So that is our training. That is what we have been taught all these years. But we have to change. And it's a drastic paradigm change that we have to do in this time of COVID. So this is where you're going to use telemedicine. So what is telemedicine? So there are 2 terms which are being used, telemedicine and telehealth. So telemedicine involves all possible use of tools and platforms to connect patients with doctors. This may mean sending some message on WhatsApp. This may mean sending text messages or something. This may mean phone calls or audio calls. All these come, or maybe remote health monitoring, like you want to, like for instance, the new PD machine that you have, which Baxter has got, which you can notice the patient's data is uploaded to your screen and you can see. That is also a type of telemedicine. But when you use the term telehealth, that involves the use of real-time audio or video for interactions between clinicians and patients. So this time, properly, what term we are going to use is telehealth. So we will discuss a little bit more about telehealth. Not only that, so there are basic requirements for telehealth before you use it. Properly, you should have broadband connection. So if you don't have proper broadband, then there is no point. You cannot use telehealth. It should be within proper legal framework or ethical framework. So till this time, we did not have a legal framework for this, but since March 25th, the present Board of Governors of the previously Medical Council of India has published guidelines. And so we have definitely a legal and ethical framework for doing this. Should be reimbursed. That's very important because many of the times we are seeing so many patients through the phone. Clinicians are calling us all the time, but we don't get reimbursed for that. And you are liable because any advice you give on the phone, you can be legally challenged in court for the basis of that. Therefore, you should be reimbursed for this. Second thing, should be properly documented. So documentation may be through the telehealth system or maybe in the electronic health record that you're using. Whatever it is must be documented. And it should have facilities for testing in approved labs. So because the patient may be staying far away, so they must be able to do some blood tests which will be done in approved labs. Probably you should ask them to do in an ABL accredited lab. That will be better. Unless they don't have a lab nearby, then it becomes very difficult. And lastly, you should ensure privacy and confidentiality. That's going to be very important in this era. So the Indian Medical Council guidelines say certain things. First is that telehealth can be used in 3 different situations. One is called a first consultation. This is when the patient has a previous health record and can take counseling opinions. So this is what happens that this first consultation is when you're seeing the patient for the first time. So you can see if the patient has got a previous health record and has taken an opinion or counseling, but here, because you're not seeing the patient, you have never examined the patient, so the appropriateness of treatments prescribed and your diagnosis will depend on various factors. So at many times, you may not be able to do a proper consultation and you will have to decline to give an opinion or treatment. So that is to be absolutely based upon your interaction with the patient. The second type of thing is known as follow-up consultation. Here, the patient can do certain things by themselves. They can do a BP test, they can do a blood glucose monitoring, which is already being done in many setups. And you can do a follow-up based on their clinical history, as well as the BP and blood glucose and other investigations you can do in the lab. And this follow-up is very easy to do through telehealth. And many patients, especially like you say, diabetic patients on follow-up, BP patients, hypertensive patients on follow-up, or transplant patients on follow-up, these can be easily managed if they don't have any acute issues. And lastly, the MCA tells about emergency telehealth. This has got very limited use, obviously. The patient should be advised to approach the health facility for care. But if they don't have a nearby facility, you can give instructions for emergency through telehealth and you are protected on the basis. But it should always be with a rider that the patient should be advised to go to a nearby health facility or the nearest hospital for the subsequent care. So the MCA also suggests 7 elements to be considered prior to a telemedicine consult. The first thing is the context. So first thing is assure whether the consultation is appropriate to the context. It should be in the patient interest, should be beneficial for the patient. So the standard of care for a telehealth should be same as that for a physical consultation. But obviously it cannot be completely the same because the telehealth has imposed some restrictions. You cannot examine the patient and you cannot be clear as to the patient's exam. So for instance, if you see a patient in the clinic, you know the patient is sick. On telehealth, the patient may not appear to be that sick unless you have very good video contact. The second point is identification. Should ensure that the patient, you should know the patient correctly and the patient should know you correctly. So all possible methods are name, email, registration number, phone number, etc. If you, of course, if you're doing a follow-up consultation, it may be easy. You can recognize the patient, the bystander easily on the telehealth also. So context, identification. And in the part of identification, one more thing, that prescription should identify the name, age, the patient MR number, if you have one medical record number or a hospital number, and all the details should be included, including your signature and the medical council number. So that the medical registration number should be included in all prescriptions that you are doing. So that is a basic thing. So it must be included. If you're not including now, is the best time to start including. Then the third point is the mode of telemedicine, whether you're going to do audio, video, text, or chat. And the best mode should be decided by the doctor concerned. So that again is up to the doctor to decide what mode. But here we are going to mostly talk about audio plus video modes of telehealth. The patient consent is a very important part. So there are 2 parts of this consent. One is what is implied consent and explicit consent. Implied consent is when the patient is initiating the consult. So the patient calls you and tells you they want to do a telemedicine. That says the patient is already consenting to the procedure. No further consent is required. But if you are starting a consultation with the patient, then you need explicit consent. So this may mean that the patient has sent a mail, text, or audio message, I consent to avail by telemedicine. And this should be suitably recorded. One other easier method is if you have a telemedicine software, then to access the software, you should have a consent form. Just like you say, when you're downloading a new software, they say you agree to the terms and conditions. So here also you agree, you press an agree button and go through. That way is very easy. So you don't have to do a separate consent if it is included in the telemedicine software itself. Then the 5th point is about exchange of information. So an adequate information for the exchange should be maintained. So it may not be necessary, it may not be that sufficient that you have only the physical audio and video interaction with the patient, not a physical interaction, but a distance interaction. So it may be necessary that you ask for more details, laboratory investigations, tests, previous pathology reports, or previous diagnosis by doctors, etc. All these you should be needing. So unless it is complete, you cannot offer a proper diagnosis and proper treatment. So if you're not satisfied with this, you may ask for examination by another local physician, or the patient may need to come to you to see you for the needful. So you may need a physical consultation to do that. So only if you are satisfied that the exchange of information is sufficient for your diagnosis and treatment, only then you can go to it. And then all the records of consultation should be recorded and documented just as you do in the hospital when the patient comes. So documentation is essential. So documentation, how you do it, we will discuss it. And then they again talk more about the first and follow-up means. So first consult means not only consulting for the first time, But even if the patient comes after 6 months, then it also means it is a first consultation. Then, or if the patient has seen you for a particular problem, now consulting you for a different problem, that is also considered as a first consultation. So first consultation means different things. Of course, there may be some interpretation. Say, for instance, you are seeing a transplant patient and that patient is continuing to about abdominal pain. So this may be a different problem, but it may be for you, it may be easy to identify that this may be a gastritis or something like that. So it may be possible for it to do it, and it may be possible to treat you as a follow-up consultation. So it depends upon your discretion as to whether to call it the first consultation or not. But the MCA clearly makes a distinction between the first and the follow-up. The follow-up means only a consultation for the same illness within 6 months of an in-person consultation. But it's not a follow-up if there are new symptoms not attributable to the prior disease. So the patient with the transplant or patient with the diabetes says that they have a chest pain. That is absolutely a new thing. And that is the first consultation. And therefore, you cannot treat as follow-up. So they said, if you don't remember the previous detail, that also is counted as a first consultation. That's an important factor. We are all getting old, so you might forget. So you must think that follow-up is not always a follow-up. Then the sixth component is the management issues. So management include health education, counseling, or medications. So health education and counseling may include such measures as weight reduction, cessation of smoking. All these you can do. That is very easy, and that does not need much, any regulation about that. But prescribing medicine is the same as that of inpatient consult. You should be absolutely satisfied that the medicines are required and should be given after appropriate diagnosis and provisional diagnosis. So what type of medicines can be prescribed is very important. So there are the four lists that the MCA says. What is list O? That is what is common medicines, OTC medicines, or those prescribed in the public health emergency. So if you are giving some paracetamol or a little bit of non-sedating antihistamines or something like, or pantoprazole or something like that, it's a relatively safe drugs and without much of side effects. This can be given to all patients without any, even for a first consultation. The second thing is what is list A is safe medicines which are prescribed during the first video consult or a first physical consultation, and you can refill them. So if you have told the first videos you have described certain diabetic or hypertensive medicine, you can refill that during the second consultation. A list B is addition to those medicines that have already been prescribed for the same condition. Like for instance, if you describe amlodipine for hypertension, you can add on a telmisartan for the next time. Or if you are given metformin for the first time for diabetic, you can add on a glitazone for the next time. So that can be there. This is the same thing. So these are all allowed during a teleconsultation. What are absolutely prohibited are Schedule X drugs that are mostly psychotropic medications. These include all the opioid drugs, including tramadol. Tramadol you should not be prescribed for the first time on a telehealth mode. So it's a very important factor that is not to be prescribed on a teleconsultation. But the MCA does not say in addition to A, B, C, supposing patient has got a new condition, whether you can prescribe something on it. That is not being mentioned there. Probably should use a discretion during that. So how will you select a telehealth operator? So there are certain things that you should do. So one easy way which I suggest is that since you are already, most of us will be using some software, either in your clinic you may be using an electronic health record or some measures of treating the patient, that you're comfortable with that and you should continue to use that mode. So if you're using an EMR in the hospital or in the clinic which you're using, you use that. So you open the patient's file and enter all the details of the patient's file and do a prescription of the patient's file, and then you can send the prescription over through the telehealth mode or through email or some other. So you can do everything as you are doing on a physical consultation on your ER. You use the telehealth platform only to initiate and talk over the video consultation. That may be easy method of doing it. The second method of using is to use a telehealth operator for everything. So it's a total software which includes all the patient details, which includes your diagnosis, notes, everything. And that part, there are certain parts which can be seen to you, certain parts which are visible to the patient, or the entire thing may be accessed by the patient, whichever way you want to make it. So that may be more difficult because I would not suggest that in this present situation, because it may be difficult for you. If you are supposing after 1 year you don't have any more relation with that particular vendor, you may not get all your files back. So it's better for you to have a file record for yourself, an electronic health record for yourself, and use the vendor only to initiate and terminate a video consultation, video and audio consultation. And also you can use the same vendor to transmit messages, including investigations, prescriptions, etc., and also for reimbursement purposes. So all these purposes, you must use the telehealth vendor. One is for video audio, Second is for reimbursements. They must have a platform where they can transfer the money. The patient can give the money. Third thing is for transmitting messages from the patient side and from your side. Any lab reports, X-rays, investigations, and from your side, prescriptions and other advice. So that should be the role of the telemedicine provider. Rest of it you should do it because the patient's records, everything should be kept in your vendor. There's no point in keeping. And it is not essential for you to keep a record of the video that you have done. You just have to document what all has been done in the video in your record, and that should be maintained. Then, of course, like I said, you should be able to upload lab test reports on the site or app. Patients should be able to access prescriptions and advice from the site. And you should not use video calls or other things. Say, if you're saying you're using a provider only for using video, why don't you do a WhatsApp call? That's the problem because it's a privacy issues. There is a lack of a proper consultation environment. There will not be any proper reimbursement. You cannot ask for a consultation through WhatsApp. So it doesn't help it. So it does not, it is a completely informal method. And this is a formal record and should be done formally through a proper vendor. Then if you're using a vendor, you should check the website of the vendor, make sure that the vendor is a reliable person, has got a background in it, and probably should consult with an IT person. If you know an IT person or if you have an IT person in your organization, they should probably be doing it before signing any agreements. And when you should also ensure that you're satisfied with the assessment on video consult and only then prescribe. So when you're doing the consultation, you should do a proper consultation, proper assessment only then. So if you're doubtful at the end of it, you should ask for a clinic visit. So that is about video consultation. It's not about the vendor as such. So this is one example of vendor which actually this is being provided by Micro Labs itself. So it's a MedSign Pro. So they have all these things. They have a platform on which you can access their lab reports and things like that. There's a platform in which you can upload the results, which is also possible. It's a cloud-based platform. So all the information stored on cloud, and that's so it's much more easily accessible and downloadable and uploadable, all these things. But you see, this is a full-faced web, what do you call, app in which you can upload and download all the things which you want. And you can also record your video consultation. You can record your diagnosis. You use it as an electronic health record by itself. So I don't want you to use the entire program as such, but you can use the app as an option for audio and video exchange, and also for text and message exchange between your patient and yourself. So that will be the best way to go. Use an app only for audio video consult and for reimbursement purposes, because through the app they can do it. The app should have a patient access mode and a physician access mode, and both of these should be different. So you can do, so you can, the present app that we are using in our hospital, that contains, that's actually opened in the browser. So you don't need any access. You just open your browser, go to the site and connect. It will be there. You can, the patient's name there, you can just initiate a video consultation. So the payment is made through the back door, and only after the payment you can, the patient's name comes up on the screen. So you cannot make a video without the payment issue. So that way the payment issue is being solved. So I advise that most of you should go for telehealth. Telehealth is a useful option, especially for follow-up patients, for routine monitoring of patients like diabetics and hypertension, which contributes a major chunk of our care as a physician. And also, if you look at a nephrologist perspective, many of our transplant patients or peritoneal dialysis patients and patients with CKD on follow-up, they can all be managed through telehealth with their investigations and other things, and set of investigations. So telehealth, this is the best time to start telehealth because patients will also accept it. And you can continue this after the COVID epidemic is over, because it may be a simpler way of doing things and will avoid crowding in your clinic and also give you more time to deal with the patients actually in your care. So with that, I finished my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. It was a very nice practical description of what, how best to harness the advantages of telehealth. Now we'll go on to I'm not able to see Dr. Dilip.
He's here, yeah. Can see.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Dilip, what are the practical challenges that you have faced in this pandemic, and tell us about how you were able to overcome those?
Yeah, very good evening to everyone. At the outset, I bring greetings from many hospitals for all of you. coping with COVID is what I have titled this. COVID has come to stay. So I don't think anyone can run away from this anywhere, at any part of the world. So right now during the lockdown period, what we've been observing is that we hardly had first 3-4 weeks any number of patients coming to the hospital except for emergencies. Now in our own hospital now for the last 1 week, we've opened up the OPDs and we find that at least around 30% of the patients who take appointments do come in. And once the lockdown is over, I think you will have a polyuria, you will have a set of patients who are not coming, all will start flooding your units. And definitely we should be geared for facing this increase in numbers of patients which are not there for the last 4 to 6 weeks. Now, the rule of the thumb, as I say, is presume all as positive unless otherwise proved. So there's no question of thinking whether someone could be positive or negative. So take universal precautions with every patient. And of course, if it's a highly suspect COVID or COVID positive patients, then you'll have to take special precautions like donning the full PPE. Now, I would like to divide this into a few headings like policies and protocols that your hospitals, however small your nursing home is, or a medium-sized hospital like ours, or a big corporate hospital, the policies and protocols and the principles that you have to manage will be the same, but probably the scale of operation will be different, that's all. But all of us are going to be faced with the common problems and we will have to evolve policies and protocols based on your setup. I will just show you examples of how we went about and what should be done. So I discuss it as policies and protocols, structural changes that need to be done in the hospital, how you manage your staffing, hygiene, which is the most important one of the lot, how you supervise things inside the hospital, what are the legal and statutory needs for the hospital during this COVID era, what are, as the first speaker said, what are the psychological and psychosocial needs for the patient and for everyone. And what about your hospital stocks of things that you have? During this lockdown period, initially we found a lot of problem trying to procure things. And of course, last but not the least, the finances that have hit everyone throughout the world. Now, once this COVID problem started, we immediately sat down and wrote down, we had a meeting, we've had about 3 or 4 meetings so far with the top hospital management, HODs of clinical departments to see, and with the HICC chairman, how to write down protocols of how to receive your patients. First, you'll have to identify whether they're a COVID positive hospital or you're not going to take in COVID patients, but still you will be faced with patients who could be probable COVID positive who may come in. So how do you receive general patients? How do you receive patients who are sick with ILA or SARI? What are the cleaning protocols in your hospital now that you're going to open up the hospital? How do you manage the OT? How do you manage the dialysis? Or any special consent forms required? Yes, at least for dialysis, we have designed a new consent form where these patients travel from home and come. They wait in the waiting area. So it is possible for them to pick up COVID from anywhere. And it shouldn't be that the hospital should be blamed that I came to your hospital, I got COVID. So we have designed a special consent form for dialysis patients where we don't say we give you COVID, but we tell them that there is a possibility in this community setup that anyone can get COVID. And I'm coming to the hospital in the setting of COVID in the community that I understand the risk and I come and get dialysis. So apart from the routine dialysis consent form, we've got a special COVID consent form which we take now. For all patients who are on dialysis, either new or old. These are some of the policies and protocols that we evolved. Like how do you disinfect during the COVID era? How do you screen patients from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. when we have enough staff? And how do you screen them from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m.? How do you manage inpatients with suspected COVID? What are the operating room processes during COVID, etc.? Just to give you an example, that's a shot from the disinfection protocol that we have defined every area which has to be cleaned. How frequent should be the cleaning in OPD, in IP area, in the OT? How frequent should be the door handles? And after every patient visit, when the patient comes in and goes out of OPD, the housekeeping person comes and cleans the chair in which the patient sits, the attendant sits, and the table, and the door handle, both inside and outside, are cleaned after every patient visit. This is what we are following, and we're making sure that it is done. What are the structural changes that are required? For example, take our hospital, we have an entrance in the front and we have an emergency entrance. So what we do is we have kept the screening and the triaging area at the entrance of the portico, and we have people with proper PPE sitting and screening these people, the patients who don't have fever, who write the self-declaration form. If they have fever or cough or breathlessness, they are directed to the emergency ward entrance, through which they are taken to the emergency ward, where we have designated 2 beds for receiving patients, bedded emergency ward in ours. So we have cordoned off one corner of the emergency ward for receiving suspect COVID patients, and the persons in the emergency ward don the PPE and examine these patients. These are separated completely from other emergency ward patients who come, like routine patients who come with colics, urethric colics, or patients who come with fluid overload or dialysis patients, etc. Same way, the wards, we have designated for COVID suspect. We are not a COVID positive patient, and it's better that you put it up in the front that we are not COVID hospital. We are not equipped to handle COVID is what we have put up. So that patients from outside who think that they can have treatment for COVID don't come in. So very clearly state that we are not COVID positive hospital, but patients who come in there, we don't send them off. If there are non-nephro-uro, we are a pure nephro-uro hospital. So nephro-uro patients who come in with problems, we take them to the emergency ward. If require admission, even with pneumonia, we admit them and then screen them for COVID. And if they are COVID positive, our thing is to refer them to a COVID positive hospital. If they are a non-nephro-uro hospital, they come to the emergency ward. What we do is we screen them, give them the first aid, and then if the COVID suspect is very strong, then we refer them to COVID suspect hospital with proper precautions, and someone requires oxygen, start them on oxygen, arrange for an ambulance, and then ship them. Same way, ICU, we have set up a separate bed for COVID suspects so that it doesn't get mixed with other. Same way, dialysis, we have an isolation room. If someone with fever or cough, our own dialysis patients, we take them as a large isolation room. If you don't have an isolation room, you probably have a corner bed in one of your dialysis room where it can be cordoned off and you can have a separate dialysis technician looking after the patient. Again, OT, we have defined how do we take in patients and how do we take them in and take them out. Who goes in first? The scrub nurse, the anesthetist, the surgeon, and when the surgery is over, who goes out? That's also been defined. The donning and doffing of the PPEs, the videos are circulated for all, and teaching sessions around as to how they don and doff the PPEs. Just to show the entrance where we screen the patients, and then the thermal scan is done, and then the self-declaration form is taken, and then the patient is let in. This is how our OPD is separated with separate lines and social distancing. Even the attendance of all that, we have a finger punching attendance here and a face recognition. So for all the 400 employees of both the units of our hospital, we have now made the face recognition as the must, and we have dispensed with the finger punching for everyone. So even if finger punching is required for anyone, we have kept a hand sanitizer there so that before and after they have to sanitize the hands. But we have most of them, almost 99% of the employees are recognized by their face, not by the finger. Now, how do we manage the staffing? During the lockdown period, we have a staggered staff. Like this, we divided them as 1 week, one particular staff will come. There's no point doing alternate days because we expose everyone on alternate days and then it's a problem. So 1 week, a set of consultants, this is for holds good for nurses and for doctors. 1 week, a particular consultant will come in. The other two weeks, other consultants will be at home, work from home. Same way, nurses are staggered. So that the first week person, if they're not, no problem, then they go back and then the next staff comes in. If someone gets exposed to possible COVID disease, otherwise all get exposed to all patients and it becomes a problem running the dialysis unit or OP. Then we had to get travel passes for most of our staff because a lot of spouses had to drop their staff nurses. So travel passes had to be got for spouses. And of course, isolation and quarantine are problems where the staff numbers become less. And a lot of staffs, what happened is they have traveled to Kerala or to Andhra or to Tamil Nadu, and then they could come back. They couldn't come back. So the dialysis, at least out of our 14 staffs, 3 of them were not there, and we had to manage with 11 of them because 3 of them got locked down in their places. Pharmacy, what we did was we gave a token system so they don't go and stand there. So they called in and then one by one and then given the medicine so that there's no queuing in front of the pharmacy. This is our OPD area. Dialysis, you can see, we always are a very hand sanitizing hospital where for every dialysis about 40 to 50 times the hand sanitizing is done on a regular basis during regular dialysis. Now we see the patient with the mask, nurse with the N95 mask, and all the items that are required for starting there in the patient. And then you have the hand sanitizer at every bed. The sheets are all disposable sheets. So once the patient gets dialyzed, the sheets are disposed. There's no reuse. These are some of the things which we have taken long back. When our hepatitis C was blooming, around about 2010 or 11 or 12, from that time itself we have moved to no reuse of these bed sheets and things so that you can minimize the amount of transmission. This is again in one of the coffee areas where social distancing. This is our library where the meetings go on, where again social distancing is followed. Hygiene, face masks. We give appropriate face masks as we put up the recommendations from the Family and Health Ministry. It's not enough if you give them masks. So most of our patients and staff, they have a habit of tucking at the front of the mask, which is the most contaminated area. So classes are taken as to how to wear the mask, how do you handle the mask. You see patients coming in, when they come into the room, they touch the front portion of the mask and then touch your table. Same thing, staff nurses go near the patient, touch the front of the mask and then touch all over. So very, very important that we educate them that the most contaminated area of the mask is the front and then they don't touch the front. Hand hygiene is followed. All the steps of hand wash are monitored through CCTV in our place on a regular basis and more intensified now. So we see morning and night where the staff nurse and the patients and the doctors wash their hands properly. The door handles again. Now what we do is in all the areas, including the dialysis room, we keep the 2 doors, we keep one door open so that they don't have to touch the door to open. Even the consultation rooms are half open. And then the door handles are cleaned by the housekeeping bleach. Both after every patient comes in and goes out. And we have laid down how the equipments, the floor, the wall are all cleaned at what frequency. Even the AC filters, if it's a centralized AC, better not to use it. Because you must have a HEPA filter if it's a centralized AC. Otherwise, these AC filters have to be removed on a weekly basis and cleaned. The person who removes the filter is at risk because of exposure. So we have defined as to how the maintenance fellow should go and remove the filter. He should wear proper N95 mask and gloves and then handle the filters of the AC. Again, doctor's room, after every patient leaves, the housekeeping comes and cleans the table. The patient areas also with the handle and with the seats are cleaned by the housekeeping in the OPD after every patient sits and leaves the chair. Supervision has to be at all levels. Social distancing is very difficult in the cafeteria. We find that people start crowding. We go around putting this. Make sure both the doctors, the healthcare workers, and the patients maintain social distancing throughout the hospital. And we supervise that the cleaning is done in the night. Because night it may be left unsupervised. We have the CCTV cameras which pick up the time, which tell us housekeeping have cleaned all the areas at the designated time. Again, the data, I'll show it in the next slide, where the data has to be submitted to the BPMP and to the Private Medical Hospital Association of all the COVID suspect cases, COVID positive cases, how many tests you have done, everything has to be submitted. This is a statutory requirement for the government agencies which we follow. And this is supervised on a daily basis by everyone, whether the administrative staff are submitting this data properly to the government agencies. For patients, as the first speaker put it, avoid unnecessary visits, minimal admissions, visitors regulation. We don't allow, the OPD, we don't allow any visitors if it's an adult. If it's a child, we allow one, or if the patient is disabled, we allow one visitor to come in. Strictly, we bar more than one visitor is not allowed for the IP areas. As Dr. Satish told, telemedicine consult, we have started on a larger basis now and has cut down the number of visits into the hospital. We also arrange for home collection of blood samples, especially for transplant patients. Up to 10 kilometers radius, they go home and collect the blood samples so that they don't close for blood tests to come in and then they get exposed. We have also arranged for home delivery of drugs for most of the patients, especially transplant patients, so they need not come to the hospital and pharmacy and wait. Tell beforehand if you have any cough, cold, or anything, and then so that you are seen separately and you are isolated. The BP apparatus, one BP apparatus for every bed, and the cuffs are sanitized after every patient is dialyzed. With OPD, the doctors sanitize the cuff after every patient is seen and the BP measured. The machines, carts, and monitors are cleaned regularly after every dialysis. The weighing machine, both before and after, is cleaned after every patient. It is sanitized. The computer and table services are cleaned 3 times a day and it's supervised. The slide is not moving.
So the screen sharing is stopped, sir.
And the other thing is, what we have done is, doesn't matter. I don't read the slide.
Vinay, can you share it?
Other thing
Vinay,
is,
either you can share it, Vinay.
we make sure that the store supply, that is hand sanitizers, PPEs, all these things are in appropriate numbers. And the acid and bicarb cans and all these things are in appropriate numbers with us so that we have enough stock for the next 1.5 months. And then most important thing is finance. Everyone is sit in the hospital with finance. So the hospital income has come down for all the nursing homes, for everyone. It is a problem. The patients have a problem. So the problem now is we'll have to tell the patients that we'll have to be charged for the PPEs, we'll have to be charged for the hand sanitizers that are used and for the extra cost. We had to increase the dialysis cost because the supplies which are there during this lockdown period also was a problem. The cost of everything has gone up. So the cost has to be explained to the patients. And a lot of organizations, the consultants have taken a pay cut to enable the others in the hospital to get the pay during this troubled months. So these are all some of the things that we have incorporated in the hospital and hope this helps all the people running the hospital to make the place much safer for the patients, for the healthcare workers, and for the housekeeping staff, and for people in the canteen, everything. I think I finish my talk with this.
Thank you, Dilip. Dr. Prabhu, you would like to?
I think all the 3 speakers have given a very exhaustive coverage of how to handle the safety issues in a very practical way. We are a little bit above time. I think we'll directly go to the question and answers, and I request Mr. Raja from the Microlabs to read out the questions.
All right, sir.
Yeah, the questions they had answered.
Yeah, I did see that, sir. In fact, a few of the questions are already answered.
Yeah.
Some which are mentioned, which are left out. There are certain operational questions like due to lockdown, sending vehicles for staff pickup and drop is also becoming very expensive an affair. So any comments on that, because management wanted multiple trips to be arranged for picking up the staff and bringing them. So there are any comments to be passed by the speakers in managing that?
I think Dr. Dilip can answer that.
Yeah, see, the problem is we we identified this during the initial phase itself and then sent our administration to get passes for the staff. The main predominant problem was the two-wheelers were not allowed with the spouses behind. So we had to get special permission from the police for most of the staff. Some of the staff could be picked up by ambulance and could carpool. We were able to get them. But for predominantly, for most of them, two-wheelers were sufficient. So we just got for about 100, 125 of them passes from the police, permitting the spouses to drop them. That solved the problem most of the time. And we had an arrangement with Ola, with NU for getting dialysis patients. For some of the patients, we had an arrangement with Ola so that they could pick up these patients, they could carpool and come in.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir. One common question, I think it will be useful for all small clinics and all. What is the cost-effective sanitization for small healthcare facilities? Cost-effective sanitization. Someone would like to take up that question.
Dr. Shashikiran can answer this question.
Sir, in terms of sanitation, when they say sanitation, I assume sanitizers, right? So there are various things. One is for personal hand hygiene sanitization. Alcohol-based hand rub is the most effective and certainly the most cost-effective also. Because if you go for anything else, if it reduces the efficacy of the sanitization itself, the cost is even bigger. So I think alcohol-based sanitization is the most important for personal hand hygiene. When it comes to surface cleaning, that way of sanitization, there are two options. One is a low expense, other is a little higher expense. The lower expense is sodium hypochlorite, that is bleach, 1% sodium hypochlorite for cleaning surfaces. And the other option is usually Virkon. In our hospital, we use Virkon also. And either sodium hypochlorite or Virkon can be used either to clean the surfaces, like we were mentioning, cleaning of the tables, chairs, and other desktops or surfaces. Both of these can be used. But Virkon has an advantage.
We use 1% bleach for all the
correct
cleaning. And
correct,
for dialysis machines, we use that Basilol, which is expensive. But for all other things, surface cleaning, we use 1% bleach. And of course, we use this Bacto rub, which is, I think, 500 ml costs about 170 rupees. 100 ml of this Bacto rub is about 170 rupees is the cost. So we use that. This is 70% ethyl alcohol with some chlorhexidine. I think 0.5% chlorhexidine with 70% alcohol. So this is what we use for hand sanitizer. There's no other choice. And for other staff nurses and other things, when non-patient contact areas at that time, equally effective. So patient contact area, they will have to use hand sanitizers. Otherwise, at the nursing station and while handling all the other table surfaces, etc., probably some for cost effectiveness, you can use ordinary soap and water, which is good enough. But in patient care area, absolutely no compromise. It has to be alcohol-based hand rub.
There is one
Thank
question. There is one question on providing PPE for all the staff, and another question of whether we should use face visors in the OPD. So I will request Dr. Shashikiran to answer this.
Sir, the question is whether PPE should be used by all staff. By PPE, if you assume it's a PPE overall, the whole body cover, certainly it is not required for all staff. Only those staff who are exposed to performing procedures. Let's say there is an intubation process going on. In that area, whoever is there will certainly need to have PPE. Somebody who is entering the ICU where sick patients, intubated patients, NIV patients are being cared for, they should have a PPE. A surgery, in the OT, if a COVID positive patient is undergoing surgery, yes. But then in the outpatient department, certainly PPE is not required. So that way, or in the ward, let's say, not even procedures. If there is a ward where there are many COVID positive patients are admitted, those who are entering to examine the patients have to wear a PPE, that's all. But generally what happens is, since we minimize the number of people who get exposed to such patients and such scenarios, we have to control how many people need to get exposed and use PPEs rationally that way. And there is a detailed guideline available released by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, which is actually very rational also, which is modified in certain institutes for themselves, which can be utilized for this purpose. Certainly, not everyone needs PPE, but those who need PPE must have access to that.
To add one more, during intubation, this period, let us presume everyone is positive and it is advisable during intubation.
Yes. During intubation, it is certainly advised.
All aerosol generating procedures, we must use full PPE.
But there are some aerosol generating procedures, like when you're examining the mouth, coughing and sneezing, we can do with only N95 mask, goggles or face shield may also be adequate in outpatient procedure. In outpatient scenario, so that answers the other question that was asked also, whether face shields are required. Certainly, if you're expecting the patient to cough or sneeze, it is wiser to use a visor.
And one more thing is to avoid nebulizers as far as possible. You can give inhalers instead. So nebulizers are generally aerosol generating, so maybe difficult.
Dr. Satish, what about the physical fitness for employment? One person has asked this question, that they are being asked to certify their staff physical fitness for employment and whether they should do the RT-PCR test for that. And any other test is there which is cheaper in a smaller healthcare setup.
The problem is that there are a lot of tests being available and which are being circulated, and the problem you had to be all these tests. There are problems in doing tests in the hospital because you have to get the tests approved by ICMR. It has to be approved by the state agency, and they have to approve that you use the test. So always it is preferable to use the tests which are available with the government. And now it's possible to do it in private labs also, and the costs are reasonably cheap also, and the turnaround time is very short, usually less than 24 hours. So what we are doing now is we are using an in-house test for all pre-operative patients. So that is a PCR-based test, but it's a much more simplified version of the PCR based. It's done by an Indian lab. I'm not really sure about the full details about that, but it's costing less than 1,000 rupees. And for all pre-op patients, for all procedures, this has become compulsory. For transplant, we are doing the original RT-PCR test, which is being done at Rajiv Gandhi Institute in Trivandrum. So their turnaround, if you send it before 10:30 in the morning, you get the result before 5 o'clock in the evening. So that is also costing only less than somewhere around 1,000 or 1,200 rupees. So they're charging to private hospitals. For government hospitals, completely free. So they are doing that. So that's what we are following. It's much more easier.
So this test which you are doing pre-op, that is you need an ICMR approval for doing test in your hospital, or?
Yeah, that test we have, it's an ICMR approved test. You don't need an ICMR. The test has to be approved by ICMR, but it has to be cleared by the government. The government has to give you permission to use the test in your hospital. Otherwise, doing a test like that and giving a report, you are not justified. The government can take action against you. So that's the only thing.
I think we're through with all the questions, sir. So if that is okay, then we can can I express my thank you note, sir?
Okay,
sir.
So I hope today's 6th edition of our webinar has reached to over 200 plus audience through our Zoom as well as YouTube platforms. So first of all, I got to thank our moderators, Dr. Ravinder Prabhu as well as Dr. Professor K. Sambat Kumar for helping us to arrive at this theme of strategic management of healthcare establishments. I think is very relevant at this era of COVID-19. I also thank all our speakers, Dr. Dilip Rangarajan sir, Dr. Satish Balan, as well as Dr. Sasikiran Umakant. Thank you very much, sir. Despite your busy schedules, you could spare your time and do this presentation to all of us. So I also really thank every doctors for having spared their valuable time, the audience, and helping in this knowledge dissemination. We wish and pray for all your well-being and good health, as always, and salute your sacrifice and contributions during this COVID crisis. So thank you one and all again. And I would like to also make an announcement that, as already mentioned by Dr. Satish Balan sir, Microlabs is proud to support this our initiative on MedSign, which is primarily a third-party product, but which can help you to do this online video consultation with your patients. I think with this emerging requirement for having more and more online consultation, I'm sure this platform will be very useful. So we'll be very glad to extend this platform for you. So if you're interested, our managers will be very happy to be in touch with you and get this subscribed on behalf of us. So kindly be in touch with us. And if there are any other way Microlabs can be in support to you in terms of the essentials at this point of time, like PPE or glass visor, etc., will be more than glad. Our managers will be happy to assist you. So thank you very much for your time, sir, and thank you one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.